Direct News TV. February 21, 2024. ICJ hearings on Israel's occupation of Palestine live Day 3. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, hears arguments from 52 countries and 3 international organizations this week, the largest number of parties participating in any world court case. The 15-judge panel is asked to review Israel's occupation, settlement and annexation, as well as policies aimed at altering the demographic composition, character and status of the Holy City of Jerusalem. Israel set up apartheid regime in Palestinian territories, the Gambia. Jallow says the 1967 war that resulted in the occupation was a violation of the use of force from the onset. Even if the occupation of the Palestinian territories had once been lawful, its protracted nature means it cannot possibly be lawful today. Israel has since set up an apartheid regime, where the Palestinians continue to be deprived of their right to self-determination indefinitely. At the same time, there is no reason for Israel's continued use of force to maintain the occupation if there was ever one, to begin with. Israel cannot justify its occupation as a response to threats from the occupied Palestinian territories. The maintenance of Israel's occupation is unnecessary and disproportionate. It is simply not possible that it has been necessary for Israel to maintain its occupation for over 56 years, Jallow says. The representative ended his remarks by asking the court to affirm that the occupation was illegal. The Gambia argued that Israel was under an obligation to end its occupation immediately. There is no end in sight to Israel's occupation, Gambia. Attorney General Dauda Jallow, agent for the Gambia, has said, "The international system is based on certain fundamental principles of law. The international community collectively over many years has found Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories to be illegal, and collectively we have invoked Israel's responsibility in that regard to end the occupation. Israel's occupation violates the rights to Palestinian people's self-determination and is therefore illegal. There is no end in sight to Israel's occupation, already extending more than 56 years. Israel's current leaders boast with pride of the country's long-standing efforts to prevent the creation of an independent Palestinian state. France calls for restitution or compensation for Palestinians." In his final remarks, Kola said France believes the court's advisory opinion must demand the following. All damage caused to the Palestinian population as a result of policies and practices illegal under international law must be the object of restitution and, failing that, compensation. Israel must be required to prosecute people responsible for human rights violations. Other states are not obligated to recognize any form of illegal annexation of territories. France will never recognize the illegal annexation of territories in the West Bank. From an economic standpoint, as requested by the UN, all states must make a separation between the Israeli territories and the territories occupied since 1967 and distinguish products depending on that origin. France condemns Israeli calls for expelling Palestinians from Gaza. French Representative Diego Colas also said, "France reiterates its condemnation of illegal settlement policy by Israel, particularly in the current context. Its policy includes the eviction of Palestinian families and the destruction of properties. The war in Gaza in no way constitutes a pretext to continue to impose on the ground unilateral measures that undermine the prospects for a two-state solution, the only one that can guarantee just and lasting peace. France reiterates its condemnation of the pronouncement to promote the reinstallation of settlements in Gaza and the transfer of the Palestinian population of Gaza outside this territory. France says ICJ opinion must go no further than necessary." Diego Colas has opened France's remarks by condemning Hamas' attack of October 7 and underlining that Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel, however, must do so in compliance with international law. Only a two-state solution will meet both Israel's right to security and the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians for a viable, contiguous, independent state. To this end, France calls for a decisive and credible restarting of the peace process, Colas says. This will require security arrangements and a state that is capable of taking sovereign action. The Palestinian people have a right to live side by side with Israelis within internationally recognized boundaries. With regards to the ICJ's advisory opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation, France believes the scope of the current ICJ proceedings must be precisely delineated and that the court should offer an opinion that goes no further than it is necessary to do so. Russia calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Terebrin ends his speech by saying, "A negotiated two-state solution with an independent and viable Palestinian state peacefully coexisting with Israel will be the best recipe for bringing an end to Israel's violations, creating guarantees of their non-repetition and redressing the damage." The Russian Federation invites the court to be guided by the need to contribute to creating conditions for successful final status negotiations. The best contribution would be confirmation by the court that Israel and Palestine are under an obligation to resume such negotiations while all states and organizations shall cooperate in order to make that possible. The continued Israeli occupation of Palestine impedes the realization of the Palestinian people of its right to self-determination. Israeli settlements are contrary to the principle of the inadmissibility of acquisition of territory by force. Settlements imperiling two-state solution, Russia says. Terebrin says Israeli settlements established in breach of international law are contrary to the principle of the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force. The UN Security Council has already determined that these settlements constitute a flagrant violation of international law and a major obstacle to the two-state solution and a just and lasting peace, he says. Israel's policy of settlement expansion continues unabated in defiance of UN Security Council resolutions and in breach of the right to property, freedom of movement and an adequate standard of living, the ambassador charged. The court would be right to conclude that Israel has a duty to put an end to its current violations and provide reparations, he said. Russia's representative calls for the vicious circle to be broken in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Vladimir Terebrin, Russia's ambassador to the Netherlands, has taken the floor, summarizing the suffering of the Palestinian people and condemning the October 7 attack on Israel, but slamming the Israeli retaliation as collective punishment that cannot be justified. He said, "Images from Gaza are terrifying. Indiscriminate airstrikes are killing civilians and erasing whole residential districts. Up to 90% of Gazans have been forced to leave their homes and they are living in inhumane conditions. Against the backdrop of a tough Israeli blockade, the Gaza Strip is experiencing a genuine humanitarian catastrophe. Russia of all countries understands the danger of terrorism. We have faced this evil time and again. Let me use this opportunity to reiterate our heartfelt condolences to the Israelis who lost their loved ones in the attack on the 7th of October. The brutal massacre of innocent people, taking of hostages and other terrorist violence do not have and cannot have any justification. We are convinced the tragic events of the 7th of October cannot justify the collective punishment of more than 2 million Gazans. We cannot accept the logic of those officials in Israel and some Western countries who try to defend the indiscriminate violence against civilians by referring to Israel's duty to protect its nationals. Violence can only lead to more violence. Hatred brings hatred. This vicious circle must be broken." ICJ hearing resumes. The hearing has resumed for the afternoon session. The Russian Federation is the first to take the floor. My name is Kingsley. Please like, share, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be the first to be notified whenever we post. You won't regret it.